Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session titled UNGC-UNFCCC Joint Session, Way Forward on the NDCs and Article 6 of the Paris Agreement with the Private Sector. I would like to invite our moderator for today, Ms. Juhi Bansal, Regional Expert for NDCs and LT-LED's UNFCCC's IGS Regional Collaboration Centre for Asia and the Pacific. Ms. Shree.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. We believe this is a very important session, and this dialogue has been waiting to happen. We are looking for greater engagement from the private sector, from the non-party stakeholders in this conversation on NDCs. So before we begin, let me just break down what this acronym is amongst all the acronyms we talk about. The NDCs are the nationally determined contributions that form the heart of the Paris Agreement. So when the countries came together to decide that we want to limit our global greenhouse gas emissions to 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius, the core of that was commitments from countries that are encapsulated in their nationally determined contributions, which they have to submit every 5 years. So now most countries have submitted 2 rounds of NDCs, at least one. And the next round of NDCs is due next year in 2025, up to 9 to 12 months before the CMA7, which is the COP30, which will be happening in Brazil in November. So most countries are now on a very, very tight deadline of having to submit these NDCs by February next year. So we are looking for greater participation from the non-party stakeholders, which is businesses, civil society, subnational governments that can come together and support governments in this very, very challenging task. Not only just to submit the NDCs, but also to implement them. And we see that there are big gaps in this implementation, primarily also on finance. And while the negotiations are ongoing on issues such as NCQG and finalizing what commitments have to come from countries, I think there's a big role for the private sector to play in unlocking financial investments and also in supporting countries in setting out on these implementation pathways. So before taking much more time, I think I would like to hand over the context-setting remarks to our colleagues from the UNFCCC Secretariat and the Climate Champions team. We could not have them in person, so we have some recorded remarks from both of these. Thank you very much.
My name is Ha Nguyen from the Global Climate Action Team at the UNFCCC Secretariat. First of all, I'd like to thank our colleagues at the UN Global Compact, Asia and Oceania, and UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Centre for Asia Pacific for convening this event. And it's my real pleasure to join you today, although I would like to have you join you in person in Kuala Lumpur. So as you may know, the need for engagement and stronger action on climate change by non-state actors such as business, investors, city, regions, civil society, including the youth, the local communities, and indigenous peoples, has long been recognized in the UNFCCC process. For example, at COP21 in Paris in 2015, it was agreed that mobilizing stronger and more ambitious climate action by non-state actors, by everyone, was urgently required to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. And so as the nationally determined contributions, or we all know as NDCs, are at the heart of the Paris Agreement, non-state actors, including the private sector, such as many of you here today, and very encouraging to see your commitment, have a crucial role to play. As also you know, last year we concluded the first global stocktake, or also known as the GST, taking stock of the collective progress of climate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. It saw an unprecedented participation and meaningful contribution of non-state actors, and many of them are actually from Asia and Oceania. The GST Technical Dialogue report last year highlights how a whole of society approach and whole of economy approach, as well as inclusivity, are essential for breaching the emissions and implementation gaps, and that demonstrable implementation of commitments and actions by non-state actors can in turn strengthen governments' efforts for system transformations. And also in the final outcome of the GST out of the COP28 last year, you may also have heard, besides key issues such as transitioning away from fossil fuels, tripling renewable energy, doubling energy efficiency, universal early warning systems or adaptation targets to reach the global goal on adaptation, the importance of nature hunting and reversing forest deforestation and degradation. National governments also emphasized the importance of international cooperation, multilateralism, and the role of all stakeholders, and even urged everyone to collaboratively deliver inclusive, multi-level, and gender-responsive climate action to consider the GST outcome in their work moving forward. So that's why as non-state actors and including many of you can play a huge role to implement these targets and actually already making progress towards them. So now considering the GST outcomes, the next round of NDCs need to give a clear signal and speak to all stakeholders. And they should not be only ambitious in terms of number on paper, but really need to be implementable and complemented with robust and credible transition plans that can help unlock finance and kickstart the transformation and ensure that the transition is just and fair for everyone, including marginalized and underrepresented group and vulnerable groups in the society. So to do so is very critical that the design of the NDC take an inclusive and whole of society approach, whole of and multi-level approach as well, while still respecting the nationally determined nature of the process. So business, cities, regions, investors, and civil society should be meaningfully engaged from the start to explore how their action can help towards the target setting across various sectors of the NDCs, and in turn explore what policy options and enabling environments can drive even further action and support the implementation of these plans. Or to put differently, non-state actors really need to be viewed as delivery partner of NDCs to highlight opportunities and solutions that national governments may wish to consider to address the gaps and challenge. We believe that only through collaborative approach and collective ownership will we be able to turn the ambition on paper to action on the ground. After that, we acknowledge there's strong desire from non-state actors, including many in Asia and Oceania, and I'm sure including many of you here as well, to support and explore how to articulate more explicitly in any updated and revised NPC the areas where national governments need the most help from non-state actors, from all of you, which could in turn help mobilize more support for implementation. So to wrap up, I believe that this event is really a great opportunity to highlight how non-state actors in Asia and Oceania can provide opportunities to support national governments in the design and implementation of the NDCs. And as the next round of NDCs is due in only 7 months, the time to engage and collaborate is now. So with that, I wish you a very fruitful discussion, and I look forward to the outcome of the session. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ha Nguyen from the Global Climate Action Team.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nathan Cooper and I'm the Director of Policy and Engagement for the Climate Champions team. I'm representing today the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions for COP28, Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, and for COP29, Nigar Al Puraidai. And the mission and mandate of the high-level champions is to drive voluntary action from non-state actors to give governments the confidence to enhance, surpass, and implement their climate goals. And as we've heard from previous speakers, COP28 saw an unprecedented global signal across key sectors to align the global economy's direction of travel towards a 1.5 aligned, nature positive, and climate resilient future. And we've also heard, and this is the topic of conversation today, that 2024 is a critical year to take forward the signals of the global stocktake process outcome and to translate them into effective domestic policies and measures. And my message here today is clear, that non-state actors are key delivery. Good afternoon, ladies. Forward the signals of the global stocktake process outcome and to translate them into effective domestic policies and measures. And my message here today is clear, that non-state actors are key delivery partners for designing and implementing nationally determined contributions. Businesses are bringing their talent, innovation, and capital. Cities are bringing their local expertise to deliver local climate projects. And civil society and communities and indigenous peoples are bringing their knowledge, expertise to ensure that the climate transition is human-centric and just as well. And let me just highlight some areas of leadership from non-state actors that governments can leverage to enhance the investability and implementability of their NDCs. At COP28, we saw over 13,000 non-state actors committing to net zero commitments across 126 countries. Over 400 companies committed to sourcing 100% of their electricity from renewable resources through the RE100 campaign. And over 120 businesses are taking action to increase their energy efficiency through the EP100 campaign. There were many examples of these leadership initiatives, and these really gave confidence to governments to set the global signal to triple renewable energy, double energy efficiency, and eliminate methane by 2030. And now non-state actors are emphasizing the importance to work with governments to ensure that there's a level playing field and the enabling policies to reach the renewable energy and energy efficiency targets across key countries. On resilience, we saw at COP28, our Race to Resilience partners are now enhancing the resilience of over 3 billion people. And Race to Resilience and Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation partners have laid out commitments and plans which are set to enhance the resilience of over 3 billion people by 2030. On finance, we know that the private sector accounts for roughly 2/3 of economic activity, and that private sector capital and investment is necessary to create a zero carbon and sustainable economy. The number of private finance actors in the Race to Zero grew to over 600 financial institutions responsible for an estimated between 60 and 70% of global assets under management. We saw the growth of the global finance for net zero, GFANs, in regions like Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And actually, interestingly, financial institutions have stepped up already.
Thank you for that. I think we're having some technical difficulties with that, but we'll be happy to share these recordings with all of you, should they be required. But to move on to the next segment, I would like to invite Ms. Neha Das, the head of Asia and Oceania for UN Global Compact, and Mr. Faroze Nadar, the executive director of the UN Global Compact Network for Malaysia and Brunei, to share on Asia and Oceania and the importance of aligning the work that countries are doing with non-party stakeholders.
I was almost tempted to make my intervention from the desk. It's a nice classroom setup. Um, Not taking too much time, I just wanted to first of all thank UNFCCC colleagues from the Asia Pacific Regional Centre. We've been talking to them now almost for from the start of this year, that let's do something together because UNFCCC, through its mandate, works very closely with the member states, and UN Global Compact, with its mandate and its country networks, with all their work, works very closely with the private sector. So how can we bring the two stakeholders together on a very important topic? And I know Faroze will talk a little bit about some discussions we've had and how we can collaborate and engage further with you. But I would also like to mention that for us at the UN Global Compact, and you've heard about all the forward faster themes throughout the past 2 days, climate change is a very important issue that we want to tackle with the support of the private sector. For example, our forward faster target on climate has two targets. One, of course, companies committing to SBTI, taking action there, and the second one is just transition. So setting targets is one thing, but throughout the past 2 days, we also heard things like how we do it, why we want to do it, what we want to do, of course, and then why we want to do it, and how we do it. So this how can only be solved or can be addressed when you bring the relevant stakeholders together, the private sector and the government, and this session is our first regional endeavor to do so, especially around the topic of the NDCs. I don't want to give a lot of remarks, but all of you are all in the room are already converts, so you already know our work on the climate issues. For any existing ongoing work, do connect with our country networks. But I'll now hand over to Faroze to talk about something exciting that we are planning. And the plan can only be successful and be meaningful if we have interest from you, from the private sector, and we have support from you. So, Faroze, over to you.
Thank you, Neha. Firstly, thanks to friends from UNFCCC for collaborating with us for this session. Also, thank you to Cik Farid and Cik Ridwan from the Climate Change Division of the National Resources and Environment Sustainability Ministry in Malaysia. So the Malaysians in the room, if you don't know, these two people either make your life difficult or easier with the climate rules that's going to be introduced. To the non-Malaysians, they are a very important part of the Malaysian climate agenda. Now, back to Neha's point about exciting. Maybe it's exciting to us lah. I don't know about the private sector because it may mean a little bit more work for them. But just very, very briefly, this started as exploration discussions with UNFCCC RCC Bangkok and our regional office and myself. The Malay word here is menyebuk. It's like I don't know what's the English version. Busybody, yes, busybody in the equation. As we talk a lot about climate actions, 1.5, but there is this government instrument called NDCs. And what is the private sector role in this whole discourse? And how do we get the private sector to be more connected in the NDCs? So one of the ideas that we were thinking about is that can we perhaps work together with multi-stakeholders to maybe introduce a kind of a NDC for private sector toolkit. And the idea for this toolkit, first, put it out there, it is not to create more reporting work for private sector. I think you guys got so much of reporting and so much data. I think the idea is how to use the reporting and the data that you already have to see in terms of your alignment and your support for national NDCs, right? But even beyond, even earlier than that is, I think we need to also explain what is NDCs to private sector. I think we are very familiar with all the other acronyms, ESG, TCFD, S1, S2. But whenever it comes to NDC, then we're like, okay, what is this? This, and I think this is a discussion that needs to enter into the private sector space because the governments are becoming more ambitious with the NDC. I think there's an NDC 3.0 coming up, and fact of the matter remains the biggest emitters are among the private sector actors. So if the private sector is disconnected from this entire discourse, then there may be a big misalignment, right? So the idea is, maybe a simple toolkit first is to get private sector to understand NDCs. Where do they stand in the bigger NDC pictures? And secondly is that perhaps you could support more credible target setting. So for example, while Forward Faster calls about this 1.5 degrees, this is actually an SBTI commitment. But the fact of the matter remains, not all companies can do SBTI because fundamentally, they may not be able to change their business model fast enough to be able to look at SBTI. But we cannot omit them from climate ambitions. So can the NDC be used as a credible target setting instead? So for companies to do the step up before they can commit to the very ambitious SBTIs or whatnot, lah, right? So the idea is to work with private sector, hopefully regionally, but as usual, becoming the busybody, I'm putting up maybe Malaysia as a pilot case to maybe first come up with the first few drafts. Of course, working together with friends from UNFCCC and others to create this toolkit that can be used by the private sector as a guidance document lah on this. And we're also very conscious because in soliciting this idea to some of the larger Malaysian corporates, first thing they say, you want me to report again, right? So we're saying, this will be a guidance toolkit that can elevate the reporting that you already do. Because some of the Malaysian companies that I spoke to is that, do you know the data that you're producing? What is the meaning of the impact of your data? I say, yeah, I know we report, but actually we don't know whether it is supporting any agenda, right? So I think this can also provide that kind of justifications for practitioners to bring it to decision makers on why they need to be more ambitious in their climate transition agenda lah. So these are the starting ideas that we have, and as Neha was mentioning, this is our first test bed to a broader non-Malaysian audience to, is the room excited or it's like, oh my God, here comes another thing. But our idea is simplification, more voluntary, and as a guidance for companies to adopt to start the NDC's agenda that will support the Forward Faster call to action as well. So that's what we are thinking about, and yeah, we definitely would love to hear from all of you all, maybe now or maybe later on as well, whether this is something that you would support from your regions as well.
Thank you so much, Neha and Faroze. I'm so grateful to hear from you and, of course, to have your support on this because as we often see that there are silos that exist in how we function, there are these conversations that are ongoing that UNGC has been, leading and taking part in with the non-party stakeholders or businesses and the private sector, and conversations that are ongoing and happening with countries which are focusing a lot on work that will impact the private sector anyway. So we look forward to hearing from you, and I know the UNGC colleagues remain open to hearing your thoughts on this initiative and how we can indeed shape it, because it's still quite at the early stages. So if you have thoughts on this, please feel free to write to us. We're always here to hear from you and see how we can design it better. Thank you, Neha and Faroze. Okay. So we're taking this as in principle agreement. Thank you very much. Faroze, you've left your phone. Thank you very much. And now moving on, I think we'll come to the other part of this conversation, which I think we are all very, very excited to hear from, which is from our country representatives here. I would like to invite Mr. Ahmad Farid bin Mohammed, the Deputy Undersecretary from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment Sustainability from the Climate Change Division. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I know the audience, as I am, is happy to hear from you your thoughts on how the non-party stakeholders can be more engaged in the NDC process. I know Malaysia is looking to submit next year, and with greater ambition, there will be requirements for institutional frameworks and processes for engagement of private sector, not just in terms of reduction of emissions, but also in terms of unlocking finance, in terms of support for implementation pathways in different sectors. So I hand it over to you for your intervention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Juhi. for the question. First of all, I would like to thank UN Global Compact's Forward Faster, UN Global Compact for inviting us to join this session, Forward Faster Now. So it is indeed a very good session, and I think we are now in the midst of also getting information as well, and also the input as well, because now we are in the midst of preparing the third generation of NDC, and just to inform you that we already submitted the first NDC in 2016. I think most of the people are quite aware. I don't know whether anyone have you have heard about the first NDC that we submitted in 2016. First, our NDC is we intend to reduce GAG emission intensity of GDP by 45% by 2030 relative to emission intensity in 2005. This consists of 35% of unconditional basis and further 10% conditional upon receive climate finance, technology transfer and capacity building from developed countries. This is the first NDC. So, and then moving forward, you mentioned that every 5 years we need to update the NDC. And then in 2031, this is most crucial one because every country, we are preparing in 2020. And at that time, we all having COVID. So that is quite a very challenging time for us because we already planned for a few workshops. And then at the end of the day, so our workshop all becoming online version. So in the second NDC, our NDC slightly different. The target is the same, 45%, but we have more ambitious target, which is 40% of carbon intensity reduction is unconditional. Also 45%, but compared to 1.0, 35% plus 10. But here you are talking about unconditional 45%. And then the target increase 10% of earlier emission. And it also covers 7 greenhouse gas, GHG, which is carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, nitric oxide, NO2, HFC, PFC, sulfur hexafluoride, SFC, also nitrogen trifluoride. This is a bit technical, but these are the gases that covers under our NDC, the second generation. So moving forward, you mentioned just now that you also other panel also mentioned that all parties need to submit 9 months before CMA7, which is in COP30 in Brazil. So COP30 will be held in November next year. So we need to submit it at least by February. So we target to submit before the 10th of November. We anticipate that the COP will be 11 November. Yeah, same with this year COP in Azerbaijan, 11 November we start. So we in Malaysia we already established one institutional setup. For information, we already set up 3 committee to administer and also to oversee the formulation of our NDC. The first, this is the same when we submit the second NDC. This is the same modalities. First, we have the National Task Force. National Task Force for NDC to coordinate the preparation of NDC 3.0. This is chairing by the Secretary General of our Ministry, Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability. And this committee is supported by 2 subcommittees, which is a mitigation core team and also adaptation core team. So if you have some opportunity, you can upload our NDC 2.0. So it's in the UNFCCC website. So there are 2 components there. The first is the mitigation component, and we also include that the adaptation component. So adaptation component is optional, but we also take this opportunity to also include the adaptation component inside that, because we know that we are also experiencing some impact from the climate change. So these are the 2 committees. The 2 committees consist of most of the government agency, and to do this, we also have our secretariat. Mr. Rizwan, my colleague here, is the main secretariat, and we also have another secretariat who is in charge on the mitigation and also the adaptation in my office. So what we did is we need to do some projection. So because currently we also on top of NDC, Malaysia also is also in. We like other countries who party to the UNFCCC. We also need to submit a BTR report. So BTR, binary transfer report, the deadline is 31st December 2024. So among others, they need to report. The first chapter is in inventory, second on mitigation, NDC tracking, and also the projection. So we need to track. Actually, we need to track the what we are now on top of the NDC 2.0. So we need to basically track where are we when we establish the NDC 2.0. So we need to track up to 2031, where are we? And then we do the projection. Because NDC 2.0, the timeline from 2021 until 2030. But for NDC 3.0, so the timeline will be 2035 until 2035. It is 10 years time horizon. So we need to update it accordingly based on the principle by the UNFCCC. So we also need to gauge, and also we need to determine whether what are the parameters we want to put inside the NDC. Whether this time, under the 2.0, we put that unconditional. So, and then whether NDC 3.0, we want to put whether you still want unconditional or it's conditional basis. And then under the NDC 2.0, we don't mention that we want to participate in Article 6. So this time around, we need to mention whether we want to participate in Article 6 or not. So for your information, Article 6 is one of the article under Paris Agreement. Article 6 mentioned about the carbon trading. So that means parties who are not able to do mitigation at their country, they can buy carbon credit from outside. So that means if Malaysia wanted to participate in the carbon market, so Malaysia, let's say by 2035, we are not able to achieve our NDC, then we can opt to buy maybe from Laos, from Cambodia, and then to fulfill our NDC. And then under the NDC also, we need to determine whether what are the type of NDC, whether is it based on the emission intensity, because currently our NDC is the emission intensity, which is emission divided by the GDP. So become the index. And then there also another method where actually there are three methods that normally widely used. One is energy emission intensity. Number two, whether it's absolute reduction. And then the third is based on BAU. Maybe you put the BAU at maybe our emission at 100 million ton. And then this is based on projection BAU. Then from there, if we do more mitigation, then we reduce 50% by then. So these are the method. These are the consideration that we need to do. And to do this, we have more around 5 months to do the stakeholder engagement. And now we are already starting to do the consultative stakeholder engagement, where actually under ministry also, the Minister of Natural Resources and Environment Sustainability also already established two panel. One is consultative panel. So the member, around 40 people, consists from the private sectors. So mainly from the main, key industry player, like Petronas, TMB, Maybank. There's some financial sector will be there. And also UN Global Compact is one of the members there. So basically these are the consider the party that give input to ministry under the leadership of ministers. So we just had this session last week. And then we also have another advisory panel. It's also one of the institutions was established under the ministry, chaired by the minister. So this advisory panel consists of representatives from the NGOs. We have WWF, we have Sabah Alam, so we have youth association. At least we have 5-6 people represent from youth association. And also we also have indigenous people. Indigenous NGO also is part of our advisory panel. So in terms of non-party stakeholder, it's already quite widely being engaged. So we also engage them. So normally we had the meeting twice a year, and this is the first time that recently we had the first time this year. So this meeting also we already mentioned to them about our effort to update the NGC 3.0, and we got quite good response. And after that, we will start in August and also September. There will be a few meetings, including the mitigation, a core team for mitigation, also core team for adaptation, and then followed by a workshop and also the capacity building and whatnot. So these are some of the effort that we are doing, and this also the modalities also is the same with what we doing in an NDC 2.0.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think it's really important for us to understand how countries are progressing with their NDC 3.0. Of course, it's building on the lessons learned that Malaysia already, experienced in the past NDC in terms of better and greater stakeholder engagement. It's really important to know that there are these two panels and committees that have been constituted to engage better with the private sector, but also with other non-party stakeholders such as youth groups as well as indigenous peoples, so that the NDC that you form addresses all of society and takes all of society and all of economy approach. Thank you so much for also telling us about the connection, of course, with the transparency report, which is coming up, and the fact that a lot of this reporting requirement that falls upon countries is also somewhere where the private sector can play an important role, because data sharing and data gathering is also something that the private sectors do engage in. So it's useful for countries to also work with the private sector sometimes to get better data collection, better technology to support this kind of data collection. Thank you also for pointing out that you have these three models that you are comparing for tracking of emissions-based reduction. I actually would only like to ask you one more thing, which is that, for example, if we have our audience here with the private sector, is there anything that they can do from their side in terms of supporting the country in terms of implementation? Because we do hear somewhere from other countries that clear sectoral targets sometimes can help spur business action in the right direction.
All right. Thanks for the question. Actually, I forgot to mention one more about the one of the stakeholders that we are going to engage. Actually, we are going to work with UNICEF, because we also will engage with children to get the input on NDC as well, to make sure that our NDC this time around is really covering most of all the stakeholders. Okay, to answer your question about the role of public sectors in addressing the climate change as well as to do the mitigation. Yeah, okay. For your information, currently we are in the midst of also, actually we are doing a lot of work actually. We are in the midst of drafting a climate change bill. So climate change bill actually will consist, one of it is to do the target. Now we will have a binding target. Actually, once we lock our target, okay, recently, during the recent Malaysia Climate Action Council chat the Prime Minister, we already agreed, Prime Minister already agreed that we will have a firm target on net zero. Previously, our net zero is as early as as our aspiration to achieve the net zero as early as 2050. But now we have a more firm target, where the government had decided to firm it at net zero by 2050. Okay, moving forward toward that will be a very tall order for us, because we actually under the NDC in our BTR, we have highlighted 5 main sectors that we are going to target. The first is the energy sectors, where currently constitute about 80% of our emission. And then the second is industrial process and product use, is the emission around 11%. And then the third on the waste sector, and for agriculture, and then LULUCF. We are quite fortunate because we have our LULUCF, we have a lot of forests that are currently offsetting our emission about 2/3. So currently our emission based on 2019, emission is around 330 million and is offsetting by 240 million ton. So now our net emission is 115 million ton. So that is the fact now. So now with the 5 sectors, actually, most of the emission come from the energy and also from the IPPU. So energy come from 3 main category, subcategory, which is first on power generation. Our power generation mainly are powered by fossil fuel, like coal plant, gas fire plant. And then we also have emission from transportation, from the car, from the lorry, and also from the aeroplane, air flight, and also from the marine, from the vessel. And then we also, the third emission come from oil and gas exploration. We are a oil and gas country, so we have emission highly from the oil and gas sectors. And the second highest is the IPPU. Now this is very alarming for us because IPPU consists from the industry, from the iron and steel, as well as cement. So far, I can recall, based on 2017 BUR3, our emission from the steel sector is only 800,000 ton, but it's jumped eightfold to 7.5 million ton in 2019, just 2 years. So the emission from the steel industry is increasing tremendously. So that's why here I would like to call for the private sector as well, because we actually should target the main high emitter, other than just target at the lower emitter. A good example, in Australia, they already implemented safeguard mechanism because they want to make them align with the Paris Agreement target, and the NDC also net zero. So Australia have the NDC where to reduce the 42% of the emission. So from there, they divided the emission reduction divided into 200 companies. So the high emitter companies that emitted more than 100,000 ton per year, so they have put the target there, and this company need to reduce 4.9% every year until 2030. So this is how they this is how Australia did for reduce the emission. So they use that. Apart from Malaysia, for the time being, Malaysia already just completed our NDC roadmap study, and also the long-term low emission strategy, where our pathway toward net zero. So in the document, we already highlighted that we have identified a few levers or measures that we are going to take. Among others, of course, energy. We want to do more renewable energy. We want to do more energy efficiency, and then we want to do more biofuel, more hydrogens, and also we need to do more sustainable forest management. This under the 5th category. And for the hard to abate sectors, of course, there are a few technology like CCS has been mooted for us to do that. So it's the role of private sector actually now to get on board, because actually we don't want to like force the private sector, but because currently also there are a few movement already like private sector also has set their own net zero target. Like we also have like Petronas, TNB, they already put their net zero target. So by doing that, they already do some mitigation inside the company. So actually you are not directly impact to our inventory, but if you do that, you are not directly, but it's indirectly, you will contribute toward reduction of our. If, for example, now government just introduced the EECA, Energy Efficient and Conservation Act, where this is measures like energy, a company that use 3 million kilowatt hours within 6 months, you are required to submit a report. So that means these are normally who use more energy, then your emission indirectly will be higher. So you do more measures, like you reduce your energy consumption, and I don't know that some company already has your energy reporting. I mean the GIG reporting that Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. So these are the elements that you can what call that, do your job, because government also already introduced a few measures like green energy tariff. So this is done by other ministry. So the private sector, you can participate on this, and you also can like do your own energy efficiency measures. Indirectly, if you use your energy efficiently, your electricity bill reduced, and then indirectly your emission will be lower also. This is part of the company they can use, but of course, but for the big company like steel industry, of course, you need to do other things lah. Like for cement industry, you need to do like more clinker ratio changes, substitute. You use more fly ash to reduce your consumption from the calcium carbonate. And these are some of the measures that are already in place that you can use that. For the normal company, maybe you can use more recycling. This is partly actually can reduce your emission, or especially our waste in the landfill, because the waste in Malaysia also, you know that Malaysia don't have any WTE waste to energy plant. We only have landfill, open landfill. So at the end of the day, when any company, any household, you have your municipal solid waste or your industrial waste, then it will end at the landfill. That is contribute to our methane.
Thank you so much, Mr. Farid. I think that's been very useful for us to set the context for the next panel that's coming. So please join me in thanking Mr. Farid for taking time and giving us such a great context. Thank you so much. Now for the next panel, I would like to invite Ms. Victoria Tan, the Executive Director from the Group Risk Management and Sustainability Unit from the Ayala Corporation. I would also like to invite Mr. Nirav Mandir, the Chief Human Capital and Sustainability Officer from Shree Ramkrishna Exports Private Limited, and Mr. Ravi Fernando, the Board Director and Board Member from the UN Global Compact Network, Sri Lanka. Please join me here. You guys can. Thank you so much for that. You can be in the center. Thank you very much. I think what Mr. Farid shared with us really sets the context for what businesses can do in supporting governments. And we do understand that there have to be regulatory mechanisms and certain frameworks in place from the governmental NDCs to give the right direction. But now moving on to the more private sector perspective, I would first like to pose my question, I think, to Vicky. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here today. But I just wanted to ask you that in terms of a private sector perspective, based on your experience, what are the characteristics of investable NDCs? What do you see as being there in an NDC that would make it investable from a private sector perspective? But also just to ask from your experience in the Philippines, how the Ayala Corporation is supporting Philippines in its NDC.
Okay, so probably I will take it from the investor's lens. So if I will be the one to invest in an NDC, what will be the characteristic? First of all, I would like to see a sectoral pathways with granular data or granular strategy on how are they going to decarbonize the pathways, but also setting into context what is the country perspectives. Like, for example, what is the energy mix in the country and what is the expected foreign direct investments. The other one is probably it will help if the NDC will also quantify the investment needs and what are the financing strategies alongside those NDCs, like if we can quantify what is the cost of transition, the sources of finance, and the financial instruments. Because if I am the investor, I would like also to see some skin in the game. It will not be all loans, but there will be some equity from the part of the owner or the developer. And the other one is set out supporting policy and regulatory frameworks, which I guess our Mr. From Malaysia also mentioned about that enabling environment, so that it actually sets the NDC targets. It will give confidence and trust that the decarbonization plan is actually credible. And just now, just when we have just completed the first half of the session, I just received a note from my colleagues in the Philippines that the LCE bill, or the Low Carbon Economy Bill for the Philippines, has just been passed. And we have been working with that with the Congress, the lower house, for the last how many months. And we have done a lot of improvements after some stakeholder engagement. And I guess that bill will actually define what will be the NDC targets for the country, including the strengthening of the GHG inventory, the NICDIS, the Article 6, what is the carbon pricing mechanism, and how are we going to monitor everything in relation to the Low Carbon Economy Bill, which is really part of that Paris Agreement. The other one is to strengthen governance and the stakeholder engagement process around NDC, and that will actually ensure that there is transparency and accountability, and it will actually open dialogues on how we can improve these NDCs, because as you mentioned, this has to be reviewed every 5 years, so this is not something cast in stones. Anything any development in technology will also help us in that NDC formulation. And the last one is enhance global harmonization and consistency across NDCs to facilitate the collection and analysis of consistent information. And that will actually also inform the decision-making process. And another thing in that area is that we have to align with the national adaptation plan of the country and the NDCIP, or the Nationally Determined Contribution Implementation Plan. The Philippines has actually submitted these plans last May in the UNFCCC. But another trivia probably is that among all the ASEAN countries, only the Philippines do not have the pledge to commit to net zero. So all the other 9 companies, they have pledged by way of policy document or just open pledges in the UNFCCC. Even Laos have their commitment, except for the Philippines. But we actually have developed our NDC, which is like reduction of 75% at a baseline by 2030. 2% is unconditional, and the rest is everything is is conditional. So that's something that we have to improve as a country. Now, on the part of the Ayala Corporation, we have actually committed to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050 in October 2021. My senior management team said that it is a leap of faith because we really don't know how to do it. But I guess it takes courageous leadership to say that we will be doing this, and we don't know whether we will be successful, but I guess putting your neck on the line is something that we espouse, because this is not only for us, but the future generations of the Filipinos. So from 2021 to today, our most of our publicly listed companies, they have come up with their net zero decarbonization plan by 2050. Globe Telecom has actually submitted to SBTI, and that is the first Filipino company with an SBTI validated target. So they have set up their plans up to 2050. Another one in the company portfolio is the real estate company. They also applied for SBTI, and they're just waiting for the time that SBTI will come back to them and will tell them, oh, it's time to be validated. Our ASEN, our renewable energy platform, it is the biggest or the largest in Southeast Asia. And so sometime in 2018, we made a decision to reduce our exposure to coal, and so we actually started doing these renewable energy investments, and one probably innovative way of reducing the coal exposure is through the energy transition mechanism, and this one is a product of Asian Development Bank, and we were able to implement that in the Philippines, and that is actually the first global ETM in the world. And right now, we are talking to the Monetary Authority of Singapore about the transition credits. So we will be shutting down the coal 10 years ahead, and for that, there will be avoided emissions, and that will be part of the transition credits. We are now working with our bank company, which is the oldest bank in the Philippines, on how we can help on this transition and in the financing side. So I guess that's the most challenge part of the portfolio, because I guess everyone knows that 99.9% of their emission will be coming from scope 3. And for the parent company, it took us 2 years to understand what is our GHG baseline. So we have disclosed our GHG baseline, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 last April 2024, and that actually encompassed all the things that we have done from 2021, 2022, and 2023. But that is the data for 2021. So the team are now, the team is now working to update it up to 2024, and after that, we will come up with our own net zero roadmap as the parent company. That's on the Ayala side. Now, part of my work also within the group is to engage with the lawmakers, because we have to make sure that everything that we do, and we are part of the risk management, is anticipating transition risk coming from the regulator. And so we engage with the regulator and ask them and the lawmakers, how are you doing with all of these climate issues? Is there any bill that we can give our inputs or things that you want to hear from us as the private sector? And so that's the bill that I mentioned a while ago. So after so many months of working with them, we have come up with the low carbon economy, or we call it now the Low Carbon Investment Act for the country. I think
That's
it.
so incredible to hear. Thank you so much, Victoria. I think this is impressive. I do understand that it's a challenge for companies to pledge something that they don't know how to embark upon. But the fact that you commit, then you find ways, you know? And even if you fall short of the target and fail, it's still failing better. You're doing better than so many others that are not taking the risk and giving those commitments. So thank you for that. I think leading in from this, now that you've mentioned the SBTIs, I think it would be great now to direct the next question to Nirav. Just asking that, you know, as mentioned, clear sectoral targets will be key in delivering the decarbonization goals that are mentioned by countries in their NDCs. Now, based on your experience, I know with the, you know, the Energy and Climate Task Force, but also with your company, how can businesses support these sectoral transitions, and how has your company done the same?
Thank you very much, Joey. First of all, thank you very much for having me. And I completely echo to the words of Victoria, what she mentioned about. So there are two perspectives to it. When we talk about the NDC, and someone has very rightly mentioned that to have the societal change, we should be having both optimist and the pessimist people in the society. Because the optimist part is like when UNGC is having a collaboration with UNFCCC to have the talk about the role of a private sector into the NDC. At the other end, the pessimist part, I'm not sure how many of you are aware that last Tuesday, UN released a report that even if all the countries who have submitted their target for NDC is going to match that target by the timeline, then after it would be a threshold breach of 1.5 degree commitment. So that's the pessimist part. Then why we are having this conversation? So that might be the point of the concern. But the conversation is so timely and so aptly because we can't blame only the governments that, okay, it's the role of a government to commit the guidelines and share the guidelines and the sectoral guidelines and keep on releasing the guidelines and do the enforcement, ask the companies to do it. There are many companies, like she mentioned, about the voluntary approach. Across the world, the ones who are listed companies, they do have the mandatory approach from their respective stock exchange board to mandate certain targets to match the pace with the global guidelines. But there are companies like SRK, still a private limited company. We don't have any mandate from the government of India to do the things. But even though a global corporation having a footprint globally, having the manufacturing facilities that not only the net zero manufacturing facilities, but also among the top 5 green buildings of the world certified by US Green Building Council. So which data to look at? Why the companies have to wait to asking for the guidelines from the government to mandate, and then they'll be doing it. So one should be having the proactive and kind of a volunteer approach to commit the guidelines and how they may contribute reducing the threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And by saying that after attaining net zero, we applied for SBTI. So that's the thing which, like, it's like you are not stopping anywhere. You are also putting your voluntary efforts and proactive efforts to do something unique. And I think it's like and even I shared some of the data from the India as a country, because the guideline and the mandate for India as a country to be net zero is 2070. And if I talk about the NDC submission of India, it's like 2016, the first submission happened when they talk about the carbon intensity with respect to the GDP of 2005, which was 30 to 35%. and then it got revised in 2022 when it became the 45%. And that's also another submission of additional carbon, these things through the forestry, which was 2.5 to 3 billion metric tons of equivalent of CO2, and that got revised again. It's around 3 billion. So it's all about, by adhering to the guidelines of your national mandate, how you are contributing to it, rather than asking the government to push us on in that regard. So I think that is something which is very unique, and as Juhi, you rightly mentioned, the role of a private sector into the, and this, it's a voyage, it's not an overnight journey. But I think the long-term targets for the decarbonization, and that to a sectoral targets in a long-term manner, would help the private sector to have more inclusive approach into the NDCs, and it has to be there with in conjunction with the corporate leaders. It's not like without having discussion with the corporate leaders, because the requirement, the challenges and the opportunities of each sector, even so as the carbon emissions, is different. So why, you can't mandate the same thing across all the sector, and we should be having the bifurcation of respective business nuances has to be there in mind while defining those long-term targets for the private sector. So I think this concludes the entire ecosystem while building upon, but the long way to go. And then, of course, the private sector is having a very critical role and critical play to charter this journey into the NDC. That's my take on that.
Thank you so much, Nirav. I think it's important that you mentioned that we have a closing window of opportunity. You know, this is how we like to say it. We don't like to be pessimistic or optimistic, just realists. We're saying that there is an opportunity to be captured, and I think the private sector stands at the forefront of capturing those opportunities, not just as a duty, but more even as a profit case. There are lots of business cases being made for these sectoral transitions. Indeed, we heard from Malaysia on what Petronas, for example, is doing for the energy sector and what can be done in the transport sector in the same way. So I do thank you for your intervention. I think the path doesn't stop if you do achieve net zero. You stand and do more, like apply for SBTIs and see how you can lead and support other private sector for. Yes, and we also hear that the Article 6 mechanism can play a role once you have achieved enough targets and help some of those entities that will not be able to decarbonize in time with the other commitments that are being made. Also, I think one of the important things that you mentioned is the long-term strategies, which signal a good kind of signaling to the private sector. So I think that's also where I link to Mr. Farid's intervention, that the NDCs are the 5-year, 10-year time frame. And then you have the long-term strategies that even Malaysia is preparing now to kind of indicate the consistency that could signal to the private sector that they can invest. It's a safe investing environment in the country. Now, last but not least, I think I would like to ask my question to Mr. Ravi on how can businesses work with countries to actually increase climate ambition, not just fulfilling the commitments, but going beyond in the next NDCs? And how can climate action from business help in delivering the NDCs, but also the SDGs, which are concurrent, but also go beyond? So NDCs are more mitigation-centric, but SDGs look at no one left behind along all sectors.
Okay, thank you, Juhi. I think I want to start with a comment made by the Secretary General recently. He said that the era of global warming has ended and the era of global boiling has begun. And then to support Nirav's point, there's a report which says that we'll be crossing 1.5 by 2025. So we are sitting on a powder keg. So what I want to do is to just talk about a practical way of getting private sector involved and how we have approached it in the UNGC Sri Lanka operation. The Sri Lankan energy mix is about 30% coming from renewables and 70% coming from fossil fuels. So there's a massive job to be done. The NDC, in terms of renewable energy, is that we want to switch that from 70% coming from renewables and 30% from the fossil fuel industry by 2030. Now that's a complete reversal of the whole energy mix. So in order to do this, if we leave the whole story to the public sector to achieve that, there's no chance that it's going to achieve it, because as some of you might know, Sri Lanka has also had an economic downturn. So with an economic downturn, I think it's almost impossible for the public sector to now be the champion of this, in which case we've got to energize the private sector. So the way we have approached this is first and foremost get the 70 companies that are members of the UN Global Compact. And fortunately for us, that they include the biggest and the best companies. And what we have done is to first try and get the NDC story and the whole need for ratcheting up renewables into the board agenda. Because we cannot take it for granted that the private sector is going to run after the NDCs if they don't know what the NDCs are. And so what we have done, I think quite well, is to first get the private sector aligned to the NDCs. And the NDC commitment being 70%, what we have done is to sort of given a slightly higher target to the private sector and said, why don't we get to 80% in terms of the private sector? And what we did was we first took an example of a plantation company, which is one of the biggest plantation companies, not the one that was presented this afternoon, but another one of them. And they were at about 17% renewable energy in 2016. And we pushed hard to get them to 100%. We had said by 2020. But the good news is that in 2024, we are 150%. So we made it quite factual that it can be achieved. And since then, we've been having a climate emergency task force within the UN Global Compact, where we have now set these targets for every one of the companies. And the good news is that at every quarterly review of the climate emergency task force, they are presenting the progress versus their annual targets in terms of going towards renewables. And I think we are now feeling reasonably confident that the private sector would play a key role in driving the entire renewable energy movement. And the latest figures that we are seeing now is that we've now got to about 40 to 42% renewables already. And we are looking at getting to 70% by 2030. But I think the private sector, if they can hit the 80%, we'll probably get to beyond 70%. Now, in terms of linking the NDCs and the UN SDGs, I think one of the areas that we have focused on is what are the priority SDGs? Because I think if every country tries to achieve 17 SDGs, I think you'll need a couple of more country heads and a couple of more company heads to do that. So what we have done is to prioritize what are the key UN SDGs that are relevant to the nation. And the obvious ones for us are 6 and 7, water and renewables, then 12, because sustainable consumption and production, and then 15, which is life on land and ensuring you don't have the deforestation. So those 5 goals we have given every one of the operations that are members of the Global Compact to also focus on in terms of going after targets. So that's the game plan we are working with. And I think one cannot take it for granted that the private sector, unless totally aligned to the sustainability agenda, are waking up in the morning saying, let's hit the UN SDGs, or let's start achieving the renewables targets. So I think that one has to accept the fact that a majority of the MNCs and the private sector companies that we have, their boards are basically populated by finance people and legal people. So if you go to them and say, you know, we've got these UN SDGs, they're going to wonder what that is. So there is a certain amount of education that has to be also done with the boards, and getting the key is how do we get it to the board agenda. I think the moment you can get the climate emergency into the board agenda and start driving the renewables target, at least go for 7 and achieve something, I think then we can see some traction. And that's what we have been spending time doing in terms of getting it into the board agenda.
Thank you so much for that, Ravi. I think that is something to be echoed, given that the global stocktake outcome emphasized that we need to have doubling of renewable energy capacities and tripling of energy efficiency. If we can focus, on SDG 7 linked with the energy targets within the NDCs, because they're the biggest emitting sector, I think that would be super important. And working with all of you, I think it would be the only way to achieve these ambitious targets that countries are setting. But I have been reminded that we have only 2 to 3 minutes left on this panel. So what I will ask before I conclude is just that each of you give your one key takeaway from this conversation and from your thoughts, so we can wind up on that.
Probably that okay. There is no competition if we are actually solving global issues. So the climate change issue is not for the future generation alone. It is for us. It is for the humanity to exist in the next probably cycle of this earth. So no competition if it is for the global issues.
To barge upon what you mentioned about, like, you attained it, but how you are supporting the others to attain in that journey. So I would just say that it's like the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, but it is whether we provide enough to those who have too little. That's about the support, and then that's noble journey.
Okay, I think I'm going to be a little controversial and say that if we don't solve the energy problem, solving everything else is not going to keep the global temperatures below 1.5. And I think 1.5 is increasingly becoming a pipe dream. I think we now need to at least make sure we don't cross 2. And if global warming is real, and if the energy crisis is real, then I would say the one thing I would urge every company and every country to do is get your renewables up to 100%. That's the one thing you can do to reduce an otherwise crisis.
So I completely concur with all of you. I think the main takeaway is that, even with full commitments as of now, we stand to offshoot our targets. So we need all hands on deck, collaborative approaches, and the time to act is now. So forward faster, louder, forward faster now. We work together, and we hope to support countries and work together and deliver the targets together. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to have this dialogue in continuation in the coming months and years. Thank you very much. Great, and we will stay in touch.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Can I get the panel session to stay behind for group photos? And also, participants do stay behind for a group photo. Can we get just the panelists and moderator for a group photo, please? Thank you. Speakers also, yes. Okay, everyone, group photo. Please move to the center. Everyone, please move to the center. Okay, all right. The video will say forward faster, okay? Right. Forward faster! Thank you, everyone. Currently it's break time, so you can have your break downstairs. The next session in Kazana Hall will start at 3:30. Thank you.